Our next guest, Vivek Ramaswamy, was born in Cincinnati, Ohio. Cincinnati's nickname, for those who didn't know, is the Queen City. For our young audience, that doesn't mean what you might think it means. Vivek graduated as valedictorian of his high school class, and he was a nationally ranked tennis player. Quite impressive. Perhaps even more impressive, according to the New York Times. So I haven't yet independently verified this, but according to the New York Times, Vivek was a multimillionaire before he had even graduated law school. So I suppose we know where he stands on President Biden's student loan forgiveness plan. I first met Vivek about 4 years ago in Austin, Texas, when he was discussing, even way back then, how to fight back against woke corporations. I'm a proud Ohio State Buckeye, and it just, I'll take that. And it just so happens that today, Vivek calls my old stomping ground, Columbus, Ohio, home, where he and his wife, Apurva, who is a surgeon and a professor at The Ohio State University. So it is a great pleasure to introduce a fellow Buckeye. Please give a warm Iowa welcome to Vivek Ramaswamy.
Person running. Is my mic on? No. You're the only person running who hasn't run before. Not on?
I've been there before, yeah.
Let's get a producer on the stage. Right. Put it in the wrong way. You have to put the batteries in the correct way. Okay. Is that on? I love it. So Vivek is the only person running, I think, who hasn't practiced politics for a living. Correct?
Yeah, I'm not a practitioner.
No, you're not. You're not a practitioner. So it's interesting. So let me just start with a very quick overview. You've been traveling around the country for the past, 3 months, 4 months?
Yeah, 4 months.
How do you think the country's doing?
I think the country is doing poorly, is the answer. I think that we have a void in our country. I'm the first millennial ever to run for US president as a Republican. And I see people my age in particular across this country who are not doing well because we're starved for purpose and meaning. The people are looking to be part of something bigger than ourselves, and yet we've lost the things that used to ground us. Faith, patriotism, hard work, family. These things are gone, and so we're lost in the wilderness, and then we latch on to whatever the other side serves up for us. We could wokeism, transgenderism, climatism, whatever it is. These are symptoms, drug addiction, depression, suicide, you name it. These are symptoms of a deeper void of purpose and meaning in our country. But Tucker, I think the good news in that is I think our country's not doing well, but I think that this is also our opportunity as a movement to level up and fill that void, that vacuum, with our own vision. Individual, family, nation, God. When I talk to young people about this, they're more interested in that than they are in race, gender, sexuality, and climate. And so now we got to start running to something as Americans, and if we do, I'm confident that our country will be doing well again. That's where I'm at.
Is it my imagination, or are people who weren't raised in traditional religious households, who haven't spent a lot of time thinking about theology, all of a sudden talking about God a lot? Do you notice that?
I do notice that, actually, and I think this is a good sign because there's an old expression, right? If there's a hole the size of God in your heart and God does not fill it, something else will instead. That's what's happened in the last decade in our country. Something else, some secular religion has filled that void. But it hasn't really satisfied our moral hunger, right? And so that's that effect is fading, and I think people are hungry to turn back to the real thing. The conversation's coming up, but they say it with a kind of prudishness.
Yes.
Right? God is a four-letter word. It's sort of a thing you have to tiptoe around. And I think that right now, family's the same way. The nuclear family makes some people uncomfortable when I say it, but actually this is the best known form of governance to mankind. And so if we start talking more about, hey, that's what we're running to. That's actually what we stand for. Yes, we are one nation. I'm a citizen of this nation, not some nebulous global citizen somewhere else. That it is one nation under God. Yes, it is a nation that is stronger when we ground ourselves in the unit of the family. Then I notice something happens, especially for younger people across the country, Tucker, is they're more open to that message than they thought, but they need someone to serve it up to them. And I think I'm the first non-politician, but I'm also a younger person in this race. I don't have a ton of experience running governments before. But I think in reaching younger people, that's something I feel called to do in this race, and it's why we're traveling college campuses across this country. And I am optimistic about what I see.
Well, since you are a younger person and spend time with them, we saw yesterday that a group of reservists has been called up to Europe, apparently, to prepare for war with Russia. Of people in the age cohort who might plausibly be called up to do that, what's the response?
I think there is no basis for us to send our young men and women, our sons and daughters, people my age or any age, to go defend somebody else's border halfway around the world when we should be using our own military to secure our own border in this country. And I will not apologize for that. We have to put the interests of this country first. And one of the things that does frustrate me, Tucker, is that this is one issue where I so love many of the other people who are running for this nomination for president. I think most of us and the entire field I speak for are in this for the right reasons. We are people who care about our country and want to deliver our country to a better place. But on this issue, nearly our entire field is indistinguishable in practice from where Biden is on this, which is in an undefined, ill-defined way pouring more money into a war that I think is destined to become Vietnam or Iraq all over again. And if you don't learn from the lessons of the past, you're going to be making the same mistakes on an even larger scale going forward. We have to end this war. We can end this war and start prioritizing the interests of actual U.S. citizens here at home.
So I think, judging by the response you just got, I think a chunk of, I don't know what percentage, but a lot of Republican primary voters agree with you. Not all, but a lot. I don't think any Republican donors agree with you.
I think that's accurate. And I've lost, to be really honest with you, I've lost many large donors or prospective donors over this issue. And it puzzles me. Because I think the tempting thing to say is to have some conspiratorial explanation that they have money at stake in government contractors, Raytheon, or whatever. I don't think that's true, actually. I think there's something else going on in the psychology of an establishment in both the Republican Party and the Democrat Party that is reluctant to the idea that we somehow can't be the ones fighting the war that's the popular war of the day, the politically correct war. I think there's no such thing as a politically correct war. And so what I ask is, how are we actually going to end this conflict in a way that advances U.S. interests? And the thing that puzzles me, Tucker, is nobody in either party is talking about this right now. The Russia-China alliance is the single greatest threat that the U.S. actually faces today. And we are pushing Russia closer into China's arms by actually continuing to arm Ukraine. So what I've said is that I would negotiate a deal that ends the Ukraine war, frees the current lines of control. Yes, that means giving part of the Donbas region to Russia. I would make a hard commitment that NATO never admits Ukraine to NATO. And those seem like unspeakable words in certainly the Republican donor class. But we get something greater in return, which is that Putin, in that case, would have to exit his military partnership with China and remove nuclear weapons from Kaliningrad, which border Poland, and get the Russian military out of Cuba and Venezuela and the West. And this is a deal that Putin should do because he ends up winning. He gets things that he doesn't have today. But it secures American interests, too. And I do think in a weird way, it does take an outsider to get that job done. Because if you want someone to fix a problem, You don't turn over the keys to somebody who actually broke the thing in the first place. If you want to fix it, maybe have somebody who didn't break it in the first place, and that's part of why I'm in this race as an outsider.
Okay, well, since you're getting radical now, let's go through a list of all the other things you're not allowed to say. So you've just said, you're not attacking anybody, but this doesn't seem to be helping us. In fact, it seems to be creating an alliance that we can't beat, and really, it's pretty scary. So let's just go through the list. Another thing you can't say is that maybe January 6th, while appalling on one level, maybe it was not an insurrection.
So let me talk about, I haven't talked about this much in the campaign. I'll be very honest with you. You want to know what caused January 6th? There's such a temptation to say that there's one man whose name is unspeakable. We can't.
No, first of all, it's
put it in the foot
QAnon.
of.
It's QAnon.
It's QAnon. You want to know what caused January 6th? Is pervasive censorship in this country in the lead up to January 6th. You tell people in this country they cannot speak, that is when they scream. You tell people they cannot scream, that is when they tear things down. And so the reality is, we were told that you could not question where the virus came from when we all knew it came from a lab in Wuhan, which now they admit. We were told that you could not send a private message to someone on the eve of an election that Hunter Biden's laptop story was actually a true story worth considering before an election. You were systematically suppressed. So think about this. You told you had to be locked down, had to take a vaccine that was mandated and forced down your throat, stay locked down in your home while Antifa and BLM roam and burn the streets of this country. So that's the lead up of one full year of telling people you have to shut up, sit down, and do as you're told. And then you tell them, okay, there's an election where you didn't get the information that you needed, such as the Hunter Biden laptop story being real and suppressed. That's what caused January 6th, is a cycle of censorship in this country. And until we look ourselves in the mirror and admit truth on that, we will not move forward as a country. And I think that's the real cause. And we're not, and I'm sorry to say this, Tucker, but I think until we reckon with that reality, I worry that is the beginning of, it's a friendly parley compared to what's to come, unless we step up and speak truth, restore integrity, and actually lead us to who we are as a people, rather than sweeping the truth under the rug.
How can you, just as a philosophical question, a lot of the people who are pushing censorship, in fact, I would say almost all of them, in both parties, particularly the Democratic Party, claim they're doing so in order to protect democracy. But how can you have a democracy with censorship?
So you want to know the best measure of the health of a democracy? We're a constitutional republic, but I'll use lowercase d democracy as a fill-in, right? Couldn't resist.
People always applaud at that. I love that.
It's just the truth, though, right?
No, it is true.
Republic.
But the civics majors love it.
Yeah, that's great. But the best measure of the health of our American democracy, our constitutional republic, is the percentage of people who feel free to say what they actually think in public. That's the metric. It's not the number of ballots cast every November. That's just going through the motions. It is not some other metric of what the media says on a given day. It is the percentage of people who will say in public what they're willing to say behind closed doors. There's no doubt we're doing poorly. The culture is censorious enough. Now, if you say the government on top of that is using social media companies to do through the back door what government could not censor through the front door under the Constitution, that creates the real threat to lowercase d democracy. My litmus test is if Vladimir Putin was doing it and we would call it a threat to democracy, it's a threat to democracy when we do it on this side of the Atlantic as well. Okay, that's a good way of not pointing the finger at somebody else, but looking ourselves in the mirror and asking ourselves who we really are. And this is personal for me. I'm a Republican candidate for U.S. president. It feels still new to say that. Not a politician by nature, but I bring that fact up, now as of very recently, certainly polling reasonably well in the recent polls. And I bring that up because against that backdrop, Microsoft owned LinkedIn censored my social media account. They locked my account, said I can't get in to make statements that are factually grounded statements about climate change, about Biden's relationship with China, about the ESG movement's perpetuation of a climate cult in this country, all grounded in fact, saying that it violates their policies for hate speech, misinformation. And I'm not making this one up. They said violence in the email. And so in my case, look, I was able to publicize that. They were then claimed it was an error, restored the account, typical operating procedure. But it's that culture of censorship in our country that I think we also, I'm trying to do my part, where I was in Ottumwa, eastern Iowa, earlier this week. Smaller event than this, but we're on the stage talking. Somebody walks in. She's screaming at the top of her lungs. At first, I thought usually if they're screaming, sometimes they're in favor of what you're saying. So I said, thank you. But I realized that actually, no, she...
When she bit you? You realized?
she came... So she was out of control, okay?
Yeah. I know her. I ran into her at Dulles Airport last week. Yeah.
We've all seen a version of her, but the truth is, so security was escorting her out, and it felt wrong to me, right? Because she came here to make a point. She was totally wild in the way she was making it, but I'm watching her walk out the door. She's at the back of the room now, and I said, this doesn't feel right. Right? Because as I said earlier, you tell people they can't speak, that's when they scream. You tell people they can't scream, and she was screaming. That's when they're going to go tear something down. So I said, no, bring her back. We gave her the mic. I said, I promise. You ask your question, but I promise I get to answer it in return. She agrees to that. It turns out she's a pro-choice advocate, a my body, my choice person. I was going to the state legislature on Tuesday morning. I think she must have known that. Came to this event to protest my being there. But I give her the mic. She's just talking for, 3, 4, 5 minutes. But by the end of it, it actually turns out, the story comes out that she's a single mother who did bring her daughter into the world. And the things she was saying were things like, my daughter is successful. I don't want you to look down on me. And I thought it was beautiful that the more she started talking, the more she started making our very point of why we believe in protecting life. And so I said, disagreements aside, you are a mother. We celebrate that. The audience applauded. It's why I love Iowans.
Wow.
She broke down in tears and left. And so I'm moved by what is possible in our country. Our country is broken. We are spiritually broken. We have a spiritual void in this country. It is our job to step up and fill that void by practicing what we preach as conservatives. And so I'm hoping we're doing that. I love doing that in Iowa. It's been something that's really lifted me up in a way that was never an experience I had as a CEO or in business. I've never had these experiences as we've had in the last few months. And honestly, as broken as our country is, it leaves me optimistic about where we're headed.
And you can listen to people. It's okay.
Yeah, it's okay. It's not going to hurt you.
So it's so interesting. So you, and I think the intro of you described some of it, but you're coming from a completely different world. It's not like you were mayor, state legislator. You're coming from business and technology and biotech. So what have you learned? How have your views changed since you immersed yourself in crowds of voters and started listening to people?
Yeah, so I think my views have changed in part by my belief that we're not as divided as they make it out to be, right? Because many CEOs in this country are frightened, right? If speaking their mind openly, it actually stops, many of them will say, well, stops them from being donors to me, to maybe other causes. They're deathly scared because they believe that we're a nation at our breaking point. And in some ways, we are, because we let it get there. But one of the things I've been convinced of, I've changed my mind on, is that I don't think we're nearly as divided as we're taught to believe. Right? I went to the south side of Chicago. It's one of the places it's not really where the political advisors would tell you to go if you're in a Republican primary. I went to Kensington and downtown in the inner city of Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia. And I'll tell you, the people in those rooms, especially in the south side of Chicago, where they're converting South Shore High School into an encampment for migrants who they're spending $7,000 per person per month on, this is the supposedly far left, nearly entirely black, Democratic voting bloc. And I have never heard more eloquent cases for securing the border and actually prioritizing the interests of Americans than I heard in that room.
What did they say?
They said, what about us?
Yeah. Amen.
Was actually the right way to say that. And it came out in many ways where, look, we are Christians. We believe in treating these people humanely. But it's not right that they're spending $7,000 a month and getting baby formula when I couldn't find baby formula a year ago. I can't buy sneakers for my kids. They're providing sneakers for those kids. How does that work? How is that advancing my interests? And actually, you just reminded me of this. many of them were asking me, as though I was on the side of it, of why on earth we're sending billions of dollars to Ukraine. So it was interesting to me that the traditional partisan boundaries as drawn are really sort of retrofitted. We're sort of shoehorning an old structure, we're sort of shoehorning the modern truth into sort of an antiquated view where I don't think the dividing line in our country is between Republicans and Democrats right now. I think it is between those of us who are pro-American, who believe in the ideals of this country, who will not apologize for those ideals, who will stand up and sacrifice for those ideals, and those of us who are, and it exists in this country, I mean, the Vice President's a great embodiment of this, anti-American. Those who wish to apologize for a nation founded on our ideals. But if you divide it up that way, it is not 50-50 anymore. It's not even close. It's easily 80-20 in our favor, and half the 20 are people younger than me who never learned what those ideals were in the first place. We're going to bring them along too. And I think we have an opportunity to do in this country in 2024 what Ronald Reagan did in 1980. Deliver a landslide election, call the bluff on the division. Much of it is artificial. I fell for it, right? Even when I started this campaign, I'm running for a Republican candidate for US president, I don't even talk about Republicans that much anymore. I try not to use the word. Not because it's a bad word, but because it doesn't mean anything. Right? If half the Republican, 3/4 of the Republican Party's got the same policy as Biden on the most important policy matter of our time, you know, and if much of the Democratic Party, or at least people on the south side of Chicago, believe in using the military on the southern border and putting the interests of Americans first, I'm not sure those labels are doing much for us now. And one of the things, I actually just got this stat yesterday from my campaign, 40% of the donors to our campaign are first-time ever donors to the Republican Party in any form ever. And the normal number is 2%. So I think this should actually give us hope for possibility if we're willing to take the shackles off a little bit, relax a little bit on thinking. Identity can be confining. Right? The left does this masterfully. You're black, therefore you can't achieve something. You're a woman, therefore you can't achieve something. Identity is confining. You can be imprisoned in the identities that you inherit. And I just want to be careful that we learn from the left, or learn including what not to do, to be confined and imprisoned by our own identity of what it means to be Republican. Let's just let that word go and instead ask the question of what it actually means to be an American today. That's the question of our time. And you ask people my age that question, you get like a deer in the headlights response. It's like, it's a blank stare initially. But on the other side of that is then an introspection to say, okay, there are certain ideals that we fought a revolution for in this country. Self-governance over aristocracy, sovereignty as a nation, free speech, meritocracy. That you get ahead in this country not on the color of your skin, but on the content of your character and contributions. That's what it means to be an American. That's what we're running to. And honest to God, Tucker, I think that if we do this right, if we actually prioritize our vision, what we stand for, I think it's going to be a landslide election for I'm not going to say a Republican candidate, a pro-American candidate in this race.
It's just interesting because what you didn't mention, so I asked you, you've been traveling around the country. It sounds like you've really, you went to Kensington on the south side. You've really kind of been to the span of the country. I watch media coverage, and everything's about race. And America is divided by race. That's America's original sin. It's the thing that cleaves us as a country. You didn't mention that. So why do they keep telling me that?
They blow what I call woke smoke to deflect accountability for their own failure, actually. So what do you think affirmative action has done for black people in this country? Nothing. What do you think? It's been negative. It's created racism that otherwise would not have existed. I've seen it. I have hired black executives at companies I have founded on merit. I could care less for the skin color. And then behind closed doors, people will say, well, that person got their job because of race, because they're jealous because they weren't good enough to get the job. But that is sad. It's unfair to everyone involved. They'll blow woke smoke. They'll say math is racist. When in fact, you know, what might be wrong is not teaching kids in the inner city for a year under COVID lockdowns how to do math. And then they're using this to cover up for that failure. I personally think that's actually what's going on in the US military too. Right? People wonder about where's this wokeness in the military coming from. I mean, our military has been disastrous in defining its purpose, how we're actually using the resources of a military to fight wars that we haven't actually shown great value from in the last 25 years. So let's just talk about systemic racism and white rage instead. It's a deflection mechanism. Companies do it, the military does it, schools do it, teachers' unions do it. It's irrelevant, and in fact, what would they ever do without those poor black kids who they could hold out as the sacrificial lambs for their own failures? What we actually need to do is to level up and say, no. Regardless of the color of your skin, how are we going to be a country that ensures opportunity, black, white, man, woman, doesn't matter? You know, my parents came to this country with almost no money. I've gone on to found multi-billion-dollar companies. And then people tell me, oh, that's because you had privilege. They tell me white privilege. It's sort of weird. It's sort of an interesting, it's kind of interesting, actually.
Do you tell them?
I say, take the blindfold off, and now you have your answer. But the interesting answer is, actually what I do tell them, Tucker, is that I did have privilege. I didn't grow up in money, but I had two parents in the house, a mother and a father, with a focus on education and a faith in God. And you know what? That is the ultimate privilege. That if I'm going to enjoy that, every kid in this country ought to enjoy it too.
Do you think, I just have to ask you this, because you're not a political professional, do you think Biden's going to be the nominee?
So it depends on who the Republican nominee is. I'm running because at this point, actually, my heart says, I couldn't have told you this in February. I launched on your show, and honest to God, when I left, I had no idea how this thing was going to go. My gut instinct is that I will be the nominee and in a position to win this in a landslide versus Biden. And they will not let Biden run against me. So I believe that if I am the nominee, they will not let Biden run. It is why they're holding in the back pocket the documents case against Biden. It is why they're holding in the back pocket everything else that you're wondering why they're not charging or bringing now. It's not a Democrat or Republican thing. It's a managerial class, deep state bureaucratic class versus elected official puppets thing. And so they're not going to have to use that if it's Trump because they think based on, they don't analyze, they analogize. They say we did it. We can debate that, but we appear to have done it. We appear to have done it, and so we'll do it again. So if it's Trump, they're going to run Biden. If it's me, there's no way they let Biden run. It's going to be a new puppet, Gavin Newsom, Michelle Obama, you name it. It doesn't matter to me, though, because for me, whoever it is, I'm not running against anybody in this primary field, and I'm going to keep that philosophy in the general. I'm not running against whichever puppet they put up, Biden or somebody else. I'm running for our vision of what it means to be a citizen of this nation, the United States of America. I'm leading us to something, and nobody else is going to get in the way.
Thank you. Vivek, good to see you.
Good to see you, Tucker.